Welcome to the WPC Plus, that is the weighted pod created. I'm Pierre Camus. With me is Nicklaus, and we're here to talk fantasy baseball. This time, overvalued pitchers. We're going to compare the recent ATC updated projections with current ADP and try to figure out who might be going a little bit too high. Let's start with a name that kind of surprised me because he was one of the more undervalued players last year, and now it seems like the pendulum has swung the other way, and that's Kenta Maeda. Going to Minnesota, I know if people just expected shift to the American League to be too much, but he did have the benefit of playing in the AL Central. Do you think, Nick, that Maeda is being now maybe unfairly perceived? The fact that he was so good last year, now people are expecting even more, and the expectations are just too high. Or do you think maybe the projections here are being a little unfair to him?
I think it's more of the latter. I maybe this is just a case of the projections haven't caught up with him quite yet again in his new found role of rotation ace as opposed to being shuffled in and out of rotations and being on limited uh, innings count. There wasn't a lot to dislike in what Maeda did in 2020, and we've talked about pitchers in the Central divisions kind of had an easier time, but looking at how ATC is projecting him, what's dragging down his value is that ATC is projecting him for I think a 4.1, 4.1 ERA, and I think that's a little high given what we've he gave us really good ratios last year, a 2.7 ERA, and the evaluators liked him fine as well. A 2.70 ERA, a 3.0 WHIP, a 2.63 xFIP, and a 2.92 SIERA. The projections may say 4.10 on the ERA. I think it's going to be closer to 3 than it is to 4. So that bumps him way up for me because I believe in maybe he doesn't have the 32.3% K rate that he had in 2020, but he had a 29% strikeout rate in 2018, a 27% in 2019. His walk rate was halved after being 8% in 18 and 19, was 4.0%. I think like the 47 ADP is, the top 50 ADP is a little unpalatable. But I don't know. I think this is a case of where there was a lot of doubters going into 2020 about, after he goes to Minnesota, like, okay, are we really going to trust in Maeda as a fantasy superstar? And a lot of people did. And he goes out and does it. And then it's still people are, I think this is just another doubting year of like, people are like, oh, yeah, you did it, but you did it in a shortened season and in an easy division. So, now go do it again we really believe you as a fantasy ace. And I don't know. I'm going to disagree a little with the projections here, and I don't think he's being overvalued. I'll take him where he's going.
All right. Well, I agree with you. The fact that I do think they're being a little harsh because, I mean, he's been a quality pitcher. Really, the issue with him was just the amount of innings he would log. And granted, we didn't see a full season because it wasn't a full season last year. But still, I know he's got the skill set. I know he can do it. But yeah, that's the thing for me. Going as the top 50, it's a little too much just because I feel like I don't think that we're going to see anything more than what we've seen. I don't know that he can do better than he did last year,
Yeah.
statistically. Um, and, I'd rather take a pitcher who maybe's got a little higher ceiling. But I think it's also more a case of just starting pitching just across the board going way higher. And that's why I think we've seen a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
overvalued pitchers, of course, are these early round starting pitchers. And according to ATC, the most undervalued pitchers are mostly relievers, right? Because once relievers, except for those few who we know are going to get a lot of saves, at least we think they are. But we're going to continue talking about starters. Now, a little farther down the list, a guy I'm really surprised is being considered as so overvalued is Tyler Mahle from Cincinnati, young pitcher, and he was great down the stretch. Really seemed to figure it out. High strikeout rate. Not the best ballpark, granted, but also plays in a very favorable division. So it's just surprising me seeing that they're going to project him for a 4.6 ERA. Um, so according to this, he is being very much overvalued. A lot of people kind of expecting a possible breakout this season. How do you feel about that? Is he being overvalued?
Yeah, count me as one of the ones who sees a possible breakout coming. This is, one place where, remember that ATC is using is a smart weighted system of using other projections to kind of get the general to get a better aggregate of what people are going to do. And I think so. It's based off other projection systems, and one place that projection systems can sometimes be a little more behind the curve is pitchers have when pitchers change something, like make a big, like there's either a velocity bump or adding a new pitch or dropping a pitch, or a pitch is now throwing a pitch differently, getting a different movement profile. And those are kind of the big signal flags I look towards for, you know, maybe breakout coming. And uh, the it, think in these cases the human eye can sometimes see a little bit better than projections. And in Maul's case, he changed. He did see a slight velocity bump of like a mile per hour on his fastball, but the big change was the pitch mix change. He went from throwing a four seamer, curveball, split finger, 10-15% to completely junk the curveball, started throwing a slider instead, and became a new pitcher with a brand new fancy strikeout rate. His his strikeout rate went from he was a 23% guy in years past, and gets himself the slider, and now he's at 29.9% after 23% in 2019, 21% in 2018. Uh, you know, it's hard to use the when a pitcher changes his mix dramatically and gets excellent results. It's hard to kind of judge him off his previous results because, in a very real way, that was a different pitcher throwing different pitches. So, big jump in strikeout rate. It was backed up by a big jump in his swing strike rate. It went from 9.4% in 2019 to 13.8% last season. So I'll take, he's seen as, ATC by being very overvalued, but that's because like you mentioned, a big fat ERA that is coming, is stemming from the 2018-2019 version that was throwing a curveball that got smashed and didn't strike anyone out. So yeah, like you said, I don't like the ballpark. Like you never like to take Reds pitchers, but I think the strikeout rate is for real. And I I'm not counting on like a 3.5 ERA, but uh, much lower than the 4.6 is being projected.
Yeah, I would think so too. And let's face it, even though this isn't going to be 2020 where they're staying just in their region, the same neck of the woods, they're still in a division where look, they're going to face the Pirates many times.
Central's still bad.
Central still they're going to face the Brewers who look worse. They're going to
Yeah,
face the Cubs aren't getting any better offensively. Your Cardinals are a little better with Arenado.
a little better. Yeah,
But still, he's going to have a mostly favorable schedule. So, if a guy like Sonny Gray can be considered an ace, I don't see why being in Cincinnati should be considered a knock against him.
yeah.
So I'm going to disagree a little bit here with the projections. The question, though, at 178, his early ADP so far, you feel like it's a fair spot for him?
Yeah. I was just I love that price. That's that's getting in that pitchers after 150, like the pitchers from 150 to 200, 225. It is just a big muck, and I'll happily take someone like Tyler Mile that I see like maybe they don't, not every wish comes true, but like there's some very obvious markers that say that he is like this is what happens when pitchers break out. Like they find a new pitch that's way better, and they add a little bit of velocity, and when the strikeout rate jumps and the swinging strike rate jumps, his swings in and out of the zone, both big jumps. That's I'm happy to risk a 170 pick on someone like Mal.
Yeah, yeah, this is someone I definitely agree. I'm gonna say, though, according to the projections, overvalued. I definitely think worth the pick there. Now, a guy I do know you are gonna agree is overvalued. You've been banging this drum all preseason, actually since last season. So let's just go talk about Sandy Alcantara, another Marlins pitcher that we're just gonna call overrated. Let's just label the whole staff that way. All right. Look, it's bad enough that they're projecting the Marlins to finish like in the cellar, like not even come close to a decent record. I don't know what that's about. But in fantasy now, keep disrespecting my boys. All right, but speak your piece. What is it about Alcantara? I know there's nothing super exciting about him, right? He doesn't strike out a ton of guys either. He shows up every day. He does his job. He's kept his ratios pretty low. Favorable park. Okay, he's been an all star. So what's the hate coming from?
Well, there's all sorts of hate. So for one thing, just starting off, like if Sandy Alcantara was if his ADP was like 200, great. Sure, give me some Sandy Alcantara, but he's he's got a 145 ADP. That's 13th round in a 12 round. 10 inside the 10th round for in 15 team leagues. Like that. I expect more out of my pitchers than what Alcantara offers, and kind of what he offers is uh, innings, and he has a very very good sinker ball. He doesn't strike out a lot. He was, I guess people were excited that he went from a 19% K rate to a 22% K rate. Still, we talked on other shows like you can get away with a low K rate and be fantasy valuable every year when you're Kyle Hendricks and you constantly put up great ratios. But Kyle Hendricks has proven it year in and year out. Alcantara, not so much. And he had a 3.00 ERA in 2020, but he had a 4.04 xFIP and a 4.39 Sierra, and a 22.7% K rate, which was up from 18% in 2019. That's great, but it didn't come with a subsequent bump in his swing strike rate. In 2019, it was 10.9%. In 2020, it actually went down to 10.4%. So I think some of that strikeout rate is a little bit fraudulent. And then there is the issue of his splits. Uh, not not very good against left-handers, particularly in 2020. And one of the big differences, besides just like the raw numbers of how he did lefties versus righties, is that his money pitch, the sinker that averages 96 miles per hour and just induces a lot of bad contact and a lot of ground balls, it is not nearly as good versus left-handers as it is in right-handers. Versus right-handers last year, it had a 61.4% ground ball rate. Versus left-handers, it had a 22% ground ball rate. That is a significant decrease, and also the looking at the contact, looking at Wobacon and ex-Wobacon, Woba on contact against the sinker in 2020. His Wobacon was 172 against right-handers, 244 against left-handers. But looking at ex-Wobacon, expected Woba on contact, 239 versus right-handers, 396 versus left-handers. Not great. So, when your your pitch that's known for getting a lot of ground balls and getting poor contact only does that versus right-handers and does the opposite of that versus left-handers, that's troubling. And like I said, if this was in one of my back end starters that I was taking around pick 200, that's fine. But if, in a 15 team league, if I'm taking someone in the ninth or 10th round, like I'm expecting to start them most of the time, not be sitting them against tough left handed lineups, which is what I would do with Alcantara. He has some of them in his division too. I don't want to start Alcantara against the Mets. I don't want to. Start him in Philadelphia. Not as many left-handers on the Phillies as on the Mets, but Phillies playing a bandbox. Then NL East matches up with the AL East in interleague play today, so I don't want to start Sandy Alcantara in Yankee Stadium or in Fenway or anywhere. So I don't know. I see, he could, he gets a lot of ground balls, so there will be times where he will go plenty deep into games, and I guess he could, you could count on a bunch of wins to kind of prop up his fantasy value because you're not going to get it from strikeouts. Nothing about the ERA evaluators and his splits versus left-handers tell me that he's going to be anywhere close to the 3 ERA that he ran last year. So if you don't have strikeouts, you're worried about the ratios, and you're just counting on wins on, the Marlins. I don't think really setting yourself up for success. So hard pass once again on Sandy Alcantara for about the 10th time in the past 18 months.
Yeah, you definitely stood firm on that. Like you're not gonna have to worry about him blowing up on your team because you're obviously not gonna have any shares of him, and I get that too because it's true. I'm kind of passing at his current ADP. The Kyle Hendricks comp makes total sense because even though Alcantara is a hard thrower, he's just not a high strikeout guy, at least not yet. Maybe he will be one day. I don't think so. I mean, he's more of a pitch to contact guy, so I mean, I feel pretty good about the Marlins. They're building a defense around him with guys like Chisholm and Isan Diaz if he holds down second base. Those guys are in there for especially Diaz for his defense because he's not doing it with his offense. So, but that does make it a little risky. I do feel good that he's not a guy who does get blown up a lot, right? Just because he doesn't give up a lot of fly balls, and that ballpark is not going to really allow him to get crushed. But still, it's like where's the upside? And I feel like it's just his age, right? Like he's young and he's been pretty good, so naturally he's going to get better. And that's not always the case. Maybe he just kind of is what he is at this point.
Yeah, like I said, if this was at pick 200, I'd be like, yeah, fine, fill in the back of my rotation with some solid innings that aren't giving me a lot but aren't killing me either. Yeah, that's fine, but man, a top 10 pick, I'm expecting more than you just to not be bad.
True. We should probably expect a little bit more than that. Okay, so how do you feel about this next young arm, Max Fried of the Braves, being taken at 69 overall? A top 20 starting pitcher almost everywhere. So he's been really good. And again, you feel like you're getting the ratios. His strikeout rate is higher, not outstanding. But again, do you feel like just because of the age thing that he's being maybe overvalued because he's young, kind of up and coming ace on this Braves staff and a really good team? But that does seem a little much. Are people expecting too much here?
Yeah, I think people are expecting too much, but this goes back again to I worry less about his talent than I do about his innings restrictions. ATC has him projected for 165 innings. I don't think he's going to get there. The Braves are one of those teams that have been very forthright with how much they'll be limiting their starters. And so I find it hard to believe that he is going to reach 160. He goes in that same group of young pitchers that I think 150 is a much more kind of realistic innings output for guys like Fried. The talent I love. I think he's fantastic. Yeah, I think I think ATC has him pegged pretty good with his 3.86 ERA. I'm a little more bullish than that. I think he'll be closer to 3.5. Uh, Good strikeouts, good ratios. He's a good all around pitcher. Has a nice little pitch mix. I thought we saw the beginning of the start of like a young pitcher breaking out last year, but I'm guys like this. I am very worried about the innings, especially on like there's a handful of teams that specifically said Braves are one of them, Marlins are another one of them. Seattle came out yesterday and said that I think their limit is 150. These teams are not like there's going to be plenty of players that will not have any restrictions, like players that have done it before. But young players, and especially young players on teams whose coaches have already said they're going to be watching their innings, like it's hard to buy into a projection of 165.
Yeah, and I almost prefer this thing. Okay, so I did take Max Fried. I'm doing a draft Champions League, and I did take Fried kind of right around there at that spot. And what I'm feeling there is in a league like that where there are no waivers, I at least feel good about the floor. I know that even though he's not necessarily going to push 200 innings and maybe not lead the league in strikeouts, I feel like he's one of the safer picks kind of around that range because we know what we're getting with him with the talent. But now I'm also thinking, you know what? At pick 103, a couple rounds later, could have had Ian Anderson. He might wind up throwing about the same innings. He's projected for I think 141, a little bit fewer innings, but still similar talent level. Might get similar numbers at the end of the day. So that's a matter of the cost being just a little bit different there, maybe with similar results. So I don't know. How do you feel about Anderson as opposed to Fried? You feel like he's going too high also though?
I think it's same thing. I think he's going too high, and once again, I'm more concerned about his innings even than I am with Fried. But going as far as like draft strategy, like you said you took him in a DC. Like we've talked about lots of these guys that I'm super worried about. That I love the talent, I don't love the innings. Zach Plesac, Corbin Burns, Denelson Lamet. If you believe he's not going to, his elbow is not going to fall off. And Fried, like these guys are, but just because I say this, like it doesn't mean I'm not getting them on my teams. Like I think it's more about understanding, like having a good grasp of what kind of production, like what kind of innings load you're drafting, and drafting accordingly. Like I can take, I'll take a guy like Fried or Burns or Plesac I had one of my DCs I had Burns and Plesac because Plesac fell like I just kind of felt forced to take him because it was way low. But I'm realistic about the innings that I'm getting from these guys, and I know that I am going to I can go heavy on starting pitching earlier, and I know I'm going to backload with a bunch of like premium relievers, guys like Nick Anderson that we've talked about before. So I think of these guys as a whole, like thinking about your pitching staff and not just one guy and his innings restrictions. Like think about the whole picture. So yeah, you can take guys like Fried and the other guys we mentioned. It's just you have to have a plan to get up to the amount of innings that you want to, an amount of innings you feel comfortable going into season with as far as what you projected for these guys having. So, yeah, it's just, talked about JB and his Frankie days. Like, man, I do that all the time. It's like, yeah, I'll draft Plesac, I'll draft Plesac or Burns. And if he only gets 140 innings, that's fine because I also drafted Nick Anderson. He's going to get me 70 innings, and now I have a super pitcher combined with those two. And that's just kind of how I think and how I build my staffs, and it tends to work out.
And that's that's because you understand the art of roster construction, which is it's so hard. We talk about each of these players in a vacuum, right? What is it worth? Well, it always depends, right? It depends on who else you got, what else you're going to do later in the draft. So, yeah, absolutely. Let's finish with your boy, one of your boys, but we do have to talk about Dylan Bundy. I think you used the term realistic expectations not too long ago. So, uh, can he do it again? That's all I'm going to ask. Dylan Bundy, can he do it again? Because the Angels probably going to go with a six-man rotation, right? If Otani actually stays healthy, all things go according to plan. So, how do you feel? Because right now, ATC, according to the projections, has him as overvalued.
How dare them mess with my sweet Dylan? Realistic expectations go out the window. He's going to be amazing
There you go.
again. No, my affection for our sweet Dylan is well known. I no, I do believe in him again. Big surprise because he once again, much like last year, he will no longer be pitching his home games in the high school field that is Camden Yards, and he will no longer be shackled by the terrible pitching development that was the Baltimore Orioles for the entirety of his time with the organization. And he's going to do the same thing I expected he did in 2020, which was stop pretending like he was Dylan Bundy from 2013 that could run it up to 99, and finally started throwing the fastball left and less and leaning on his tremendous secondaries, including like one of the better sliders you're going to see. So I am like I'm not expecting to get what we got out of Bundy last year exactly, but I'm this is another one of those things where uh, the projections, I don't think they've quite given this new version of Bundy the due credit. Like they're still thinking too much of the old Bundy from Baltimore that threw his fastball like had normal fastball usage, and instead of what he started doing in 2020, which was throwing his fastball, 40% of the time and doing sliders and changeups the rest of the time, and daring batters to hit it, and they didn't. His slider at a 22.3% swing strike rate, his curveball at a 17.1% swing strike rate. It made his fastball play up better. You mentioned the six-man rotation in LA, and like you don't love to hear that, but at the same time, I've been watching Bundy for a very long time, and he tends to do better with more rest. Uh, I should run the numbers on that because I used to know like this kind of it happened in Baltimore for a while. Like it's like, oh man, Dylan Bundy pitches a lot better when we give him that extra day when he was coming back from one of his myriad of injuries. And so that it's going to cut down on his innings than it would if he was pitching every fifth day. But once again, just going back to this season where a lot of pitchers are going to have the reins on him. I don't think Bundy's necessarily going to have reins on him. If he's pitching every sixth day, and because of like the relative gap of all the people we are worried about having innings, like I don't think that gap will be as big between Bundy and the other guys that maybe have some more restrictions. So I think that'll come out in the wash a little bit. And I don't love Bundy's ADP. Like it's like everyone discovering a band, falling in love with the band that you've loved forever, but the world has ignored. So I don't really like that everyone is now on Team Bundy and drafting him so high, and I can't just get him at the end of drafts like I did last year. But I'll have him on some teams. Like I'm kind of I like him more than the projections like him. I probably don't like him as much as ADP, so it'll kind of just be draft determinant.
He's not all yours. You have to share, right? Sharing is caring.
It's a real bummer.
Just once in a while, just toss out a breadcrumb here. All right. So there you go. Some overvalued pitchers to consider for the 2021 season. Some of which we agree with, some of which we don't. But of course, we'll have a lot more analysis on all of this at rotoballer.com. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We'll be here all off season, draft season. It's officially draft season to get you prepared to win and dominate your leagues. All right. Thanks for watching.